I read 22 books in the month of May, and I'm going to give you my detailed thoughts on all of them, give you some statistics, which ones I think are worth reading. I had a 1-star read this month, a book I absolutely hated. May was a very reading heavy month because I did a readathon, 2 separate readathons with 2 of my closest friends. So I got a lot of extra books read that I maybe otherwise wouldn't have maybe got to. If you saw my curating my May TBR video, you'll be happy to know I did stick to almost the entire TBR. There's just one book that I did not read. Well, I've started it and I've just not finished it in the month of May, but I'm hopefully going to read it within the next week or so. I read 22 books, which is 4,910 pages, which works out as an average book length of 223 pages. And my average star rating for the month was 3.14, which is quite disappointing. That's quite low, but I didn't have a 5-star. I've not had a 5-star in quite a while. I read 21 of those books physically, and I read 1 via audiobook. And my most 2 common genres were literary fiction and horror. If you're wondering where I got these statistics, they are from Storygraph, which I've been using for years but keep dipping in and out of. But the past 6 months I've been back into using it religiously. And I also use a Excel spreadsheet that I bought from a user on Etsy, which I'll tag here because I can't remember the name of the store. But I also love tracking all of my reading on that because you can track whether a book's translated, how much you paid for the book, how much you saved on the book. You can track if there's any disability rep in the book, the countries you're reading from, the ethnicity of the authors you're reading from, the years they were published. I like this spreadsheet mostly because at the end of the year I can see how diverse my reading was and look for areas where I could improve in the next year. I'm going to start with the book that was 1 star, the book I absolutely hated. I have so much to say about this book. I don't have a physical copy because I borrowed it from a friend. And they were very disappointed that I didn't like it because they loved it. But I just think there are so many things wrong with this book. Even though it has thousands upon thousands of 5-star reviews, 4-star reviews, it's like a worldwide bestseller. This author is so many people's favourite author, and I do not understand. The book I'm talking about is A Man Called Ove by Frederick Bateman. And if you're watching this and you loved it, I'm not even sorry because I have so many problems with this book. I literally don't even know where to start. If you're not familiar with this book, the premise is about an old man, called Ove, who is bitter, he's miserable, he's grumpy, he hates the world, he thinks all the people around him are idiots, and he has this redemption arc where we grow to become charmed by him and see the kindness that's deep within him, and it's meant to evoke a lot of emotion and empathy. But Ove is too horrid of a character for this plot to work for me at all. First of all, Ove is portrayed as this kind of grumpy old man, like, oh, silly old Ove, he's just an old man who doesn't know any better. All of the characters in the story treat him as if he's this vulnerable elderly man. He's only 59. He's not of pension age, he's not even retired. He's at a perfectly young age to be educated and not be so ignorant, yet he is actually just a horrible person. We're supposed to buy into the idea that Ove became so bitter and miserable because of the traumatic things that have happened in his life. But when we go to the flashbacks of earlier in his life, he was still horrible and nasty even before half of these events took place. So I don't really see the excuse. Ove uses homophobic slurs repeatedly throughout the book, and no one really pulls him up on it. There are some gay characters that he meets that end up being quite friendly with Ove. And I think because he becomes friendly with these gay characters, we're supposed to just forget about the fact that he continues to use a homophobic slur. But no, I don't buy that. He also repeatedly makes fatphobic comments, and in general, everyone around him, he's just horrible too. He's not just grumpy and moody, he's actually nasty. He speaks to people like they're dirt at the bottom of his shoe. If Ove had been just a little bit grumpy, the storyline would have worked a lot better. I could have maybe pulled an ounce of empathy for him, but I just simply could not. At one point, there is a stray cat that is roaming around the area. Ove comes back home from wherever he's been, and one of the neighbours points out to him, like, oh my god, that cat is in like a hole of snow and it's suffering, it's going to freeze to death, it's about to die, we need to do something about it. And Ove's just like, oh no, I don't care, like, and he just walks into his house. He's just been told this cat is suffering a long, slow, painful death, and Ove literally does not give a single fuck. He does not care at all. The neighbour's like, no, we need to do something. So she pulls the cat inside, tries to revive it, and manages to bring it back to its normal state. Once the cat recovers, Ove starts to build somewhat of a bond with the cat, somewhat of an attachment to the cat, kind of begrudgingly, but they start to have this kind of they start to have a little bit of a relationship, and we're supposed to see this as the kindness coming out of Ove, the charming side coming out of him. But how can I believe that when he was 10 minutes ago happily ready to let this cat die a long, slow, painful, torturous death. I also did not like the relationship between Ove and his wife. His wife was portrayed as this absolute ray of sunshine. She was smiley, friendly to everyone, chatty to everyone, saw the good in everyone, just a generally lovely person. Whereas Ove was always this miserable, moody, horrible to be around man. And we're supposed to see this relationship as lovely and cute, and they balance each other out. And she helps Ove become a better person. She balances his character. Again, I don't buy into it because in reality, why should a lovely woman like his wife, who is an absolute ray of sunshine, stick around with this miserable man? Anytime he's rude to someone, she kind of compensates for him and comes up with excuses for him. In reality, if one of my friends was going out with someone that behaves the way Ove did in this book, I would be like, dump them immediately. Outside of the actual character, I also just did really not gel with Frederick Buckman's writing. He overuses similes to the extreme. It felt like he literally did not know a single other literary technique. I only read 10 pages and I messaged my friend who lent the book to me to say I'd started the book, and he was asking what I thought of it. And I said this author really likes similes. I was literally only 10 pages in, but sometimes there were multiple similes being used within the same paragraph. Some of the similes were super long as well. There'd be loads on every page, and it was stuck out like a sore thumb to me. It was a little bit cringy. I believe this was the author's first novel, correct me if I'm wrong, so maybe his writing has got better over the years, I don't know, but I really did not like his writing style. I know some people who didn't like A Man Called Ove but enjoyed Beartown and some of the author's other books, but because I didn't even like the writing style, let alone the story and characters, I don't think I'll ever be reading from this author again. This month, I went to go see the author Agostina Bastarrica at an event at the West Kirby Bookshop to talk about her new book, The Unworthy. I loved Tender is the Flesh and 19 Claws and a Blackbird, and I've wanted to hear this author speak and meet her for so long, so I was so excited. The event was unreal. Agostina Bastarrica is such a lovely woman, such an intelligent woman. It's absolutely hilarious. I could listen to her speak all day long. The event was about an hour, but I could have easily sat there for hours more. So I definitely will see her again when she next comes to the UK. But because I was going to that event, I obviously had to read The Unworthy. I was sent a really early copy of it months back, and I did try reading it, but I got 100 pages in and was not enjoying it. I refused to accept that I wasn't liking an Agostina Bastarrica book because I loved her previous two, so I was just thinking, maybe I'm not in the right frame of mind, maybe it's just not the right time for me to be reading this book, I'll come back to it at a later date. So I put it down and waited until the month of the event for me to go back and restart the book, and I'm so glad I did, because I did actually enjoy it this time round. I think last time my mind was just all over the shop and I just wasn't in the right space in my life to read the book, so I'm so glad I put it down when I did. So this is The Unworthy. I did enjoy it, but don't get me wrong, it is not by any stretch of the imagination my favourite book from Agostina Bastarrica. It's probably my least favourite of the three, but I still recommend it. This is about our narrator who is writing a diary, and she is in the House of the Sacred Sisterhood, which is an old monastery turned into a convent. The world outside is in disaster. The land is barren. We're not too sure what's happened, but we just know that the world outside of the walls of this convent is uninhabitable. The convent is run by sisters, and there is a huge hierarchy to the system here. And our narrator is explaining to us the events that she has been going through her diary entries. At one point, a stranger turns up at the convent seeking refuge, and our narrator forms an infatuation with them, and then the story kind of begins to unravel from there. This book is very visceral. There is lots of body horror, but they're not so horrifying and gruesome and disturbing because they are written in such a beautiful way, but the imagery will ingrain in your brain forever. Lots of self-harm as offerings to the convent, lots of peculiar eating habits, and there is lots of bodily fluids. One thing I love about Agostina Bastarrica's writing style, and it's very present in this book, and she spoke about doing this at her event, is that she's very much an author that shows and doesn't tell. I did really want to get some clips of her talking at the event because she was talking about so many interesting things, but I felt too shy and awkward to prop my phone up. For example, when talking about this whole show don't tell, she was talking about, for example, you might say, Emily is crying. That would be telling the reader, whereas she prefers to show the reader. Rather than feeding the reader information on a silver plate, she shows you with beautiful description, literary techniques. There was one element I loved of this story, and I really wish there was more of it. I know it wasn't really the point to the book, but I was just so intrigued by it and I wanted more. So we understand that the outside world is in some sort of disaster and it's uninhabitable. That is why people have sought refuge in this convent. I don't think this is a spoiler. It could be, so maybe skip a few seconds just in case, I don't know. But throughout the book, there are glimpses of maybe the outside world is actually becoming habitable. The narrator sees things and notices certain things that makes her question whether all this time she has spent locked within this convent, she wonders whether the world outside is actually recovering, and maybe it has been for a while and she just doesn't know. We only get tiny little glimpses of this thought process in the narrator, and I just would have loved that to be explored more. Normally, I love short books, but on the rare occasion, and it's with this, I would have loved this book to be a full-on 400, 500-page novel. I think there's so much more that could have been done with this. My advice would be to really take your time with this book, because I think the reason I struggled reading it so much the first time round is getting to grips with all the different types of people, the different places and the different characters. So within the House of the Sacred Sisterhood, there are different groups of people within the hierarchy. We have the enlightened, you have the unworthy, the chosen, the saints. I can't even remember now. There's so many different types of people, and they are all in different positions of the hierarchy and have different benefits and different disadvantages, and they can do different things, see different things. And every time one of these people were mentioned, I'd have to wrap my brain to remember who they are and what they are. So because it's so short, it's like 180 pages, I did find it quite difficult to keep concentrating on the story whilst also simultaneously trying to remember the different types of people and what they were. Also, as someone who went to Catholic primary school and Catholic secondary school but is an atheist, I loved the commentary on religion in this book. This month I finally read the new Siaka Murata Vanishing World, and I liked this, but I'm very sad to report I didn't love it. It's not a new favourite. It's definitely bottom of the pile of Siaka Murata's books for me. This is about a world in which we no longer have intercourse as a way to be pregnant and have children, and it is all done artificially, and you don't go into a marriage for romance or love. You go into a marriage out of convenience, someone to live with, someone to share chores and bills with. Whilst you're in one of these marriages, you can still have lovers and, I guess, affairs. You can still have romantic relationships with other people. Marriage is purely for pragmatic reasons, and to have any sort of romantic relations within a marriage is seen as incestuous. Our main character was actually conceived through historic methods of pregnancy, intercourse, so everyone else around her sees her as rather strange and weird. And then we follow her throughout her life as she grapples with love and relations and family and children. I believe I read that the original Japanese language of Vanishing World was written before Siaka Murata's other books, which makes sense because to me this does feel not as well written as her other books. It's definitely one of those weird girl books, and I did enjoy it. I think I'd enjoy anything that Siaka Murata writes. I just love her writing style. It feels really easy to ingest, and I flew through it and I did like it, but it hasn't had the best reviews, and I can see why. I think if you never read anything from Siaka Murata before, I definitely wouldn't start with this one. If you are a hardcore Siaka Murata fan, I think you still will enjoy this. I was very kindly sent an early copy of this short story anthology, Be Gay, Do Crime, which is actually, the publication day is actually today, the day I'm filming it. This anthology is 16 stories of queer chaos, and each story is from a different author. Before even starting this book, I already knew that there would be two stories I'd enjoy because they are from authors I enjoy, one of them being Alyssa Nutting and one of them being Emily Austin. And these two stories did end up being the two stories I loved, the two that I've remembered, the two that have stuck in my brain. I'm not going to lie, unfortunately, all the other 14 stories were very forgettable for me. I did not particularly enjoy the writing style of all of the other authors, and I'm quite sad about that because there were plenty of authors in here who I've not read from before, so I was hoping to maybe find some new authors for me to research and get into and love. But most of the stories did fall flat for me. And I hate saying that because I was really excited for this book and I want this book to do so well. The amount of effort that has gone into putting this collection together is unreal. And I do genuinely think most of you who read this will probably love it. It's just my personal taste. I have wanted to read from Yuri Herrera for quite some time, and I read my first book from them this month, which is Season of the Swamp. And I'm so sad to report, I did not get this book at all. I had absolutely no idea what was going on at any moment in this book. It went completely over my head. I don't know whether that's an insult to my comprehension skills or an insult to the writing, but I just did not get on with this book at all. This is about the first Indigenous president of Mexico who goes to New Orleans, and we just learn about his experience there. He falls in love with the music and the food, but also discovers the trade of human beings. I just felt really lost reading this book. I kept forgetting who was who. The setting and the storyline was not grabbing me at all. I struggled so hard to concentrate on what was happening, where it was, who was saying what. Again, this might just be a personal thing. There probably is plenty of people out there who love this book and thought so much of it, but for me, I have already completely forgot every element of it. I do definitely want to read something else from Yuri Herrera though, because Their other books sound great, and I'm sure I will enjoy at least one of them. I think this one was just maybe the wrong place to start. I read Heartburn by Nora Ephron, which is the only novel written by her. She is normally a director for lots of famous rom-com films, and I have had this on my radar for a while. This was on my May TBR as a thrifted book on my shelves, and I'm so glad I pulled that prompt out of my TBR jar, because otherwise I don't think I would have got to this book for quite some time, and I actually ended up loving it. This book gets criticism for being boring, but this was my exact kind of book. If you're a fan of Barbara Comyns or Caroline Blackwood, I think you will absolutely love this as well. It's the exact same type of humour and plotless meandering. This is about Rachel, who is a somewhat famous cookery writer, and 7 months into her pregnancy, she finds out that her husband has been having an affair and is in love with someone else. We then just follow her over the coming months as she deals with this betrayal and how her life changes. And honestly, Rachel is an absolutely hilarious character. She has such dry humour. It's very rare that a book makes me laugh out loud, but this made me snort multiple times. It really reminded me of Our Spoons Came from Woolworths by Barbara Comyns, that type of book where absolutely zilch is happening. We are literally just following someone's boring, mundane life, but it's still somehow just incredibly captivating. If you're like me and you do actually just enjoy boring books, I think you will love Heartburn. I'm very sad that this was Nora Ephron's only ever book, because I would have absolutely loved to have read more from her. I was obsessed with the writing. If you're in a reading slump, you don't want something too dramatic, something too bleak, something too depressing. You just want something light-hearted. Even though it is touching on somewhat of a sad topic, this is still a very light-hearted book. I think this is the perfect book to just make you laugh a little bit and get out of a reading slump. For Ben Reads Good, Read Good Challenge, the prompt for this month was Deja Vu. So that was to read a book, reread a book you've already read, or if you don't want to do that, read a book from an author you've already read from before. So for that prompt this month, I read Before We Forget Kindness by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, and this is the 5th installment, I think, in the Before the Coffee Gets Cold series. I'm sure you already know what this series is about. It's about a coffee shop where you can go back in time, but you only have the amount of time until the coffee gets cold. I have always been a big advocate and lover of this series. I know it gets a mixed bag of reviews, but I've just always loved it. They're always so heartfelt, so heartwarming, sometimes sad. It does what it says on the tin. You always know what you want to get. If you're in a reading slump or you're struggling to know what to read, for me, these books are just, I know exactly what I'm going to get, so I can go into it and know it's going to be a somewhat positive experience. I liked this book. I don't know whether I'm a little bit getting over the concept now, getting a bit over the series, or if this was simply just not written as well as the others. But for me, I think this is definitely my least favourite out of the series so far. It could also just be the content matter in this book, because each book will revolve around maybe 3, 4, 5 different characters who go into the coffee shop and want to go back in time. And each of them will obviously have a very different story and a very, very different reason why they want to go back in time. 3 out of 4 of the stories and characters in this book were centered around children, or children going to see their parents, or someone having a baby. And as someone who is child-free by choice, who never wants to have children, has never really been around children, I did not care for these stories at all. I know they are meant to evoke empathy, but I really struggle to, because it's just something I cannot relate to at all. So maybe it was just a personal preference thing, but it definitely is my least favourite. I'm still going to read more if more are published, because they're just a safe bet for me when I want something nice to read. I do think they've lost a little bit of the magic for me now. The one audiobook I did this month was Open Throat by Henry Hoke, and I loved this so much more than I expected to. I don't read a whole lot of fiction on audio because I really struggle to concentrate on it. I find non-fiction audio much easier to focus on. When I'm listening to an audiobook, especially fiction, I find myself daydreaming or focusing on other things, and half an hour has passed by and I'm like, oh my life, I've literally not took in a word of that and have to restart the whole thing. But there was one night where I was just chilling and I was looking through BookBeat, and I saw that Open Throat was super short. It was like less than 2 hours, and I listen to audiobooks normally on like 1.5, 1.75 speed anyway, so I knew it was going to be even shorter, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to stick it on. I literally lay on my back on the sofa like a corpse and just stared at a blank wall the entire hour and a half, or however long it was for this book to finish, because otherwise I would have just completely daydreamed and not remembered a single word. But luckily, this book was so brilliant that I was able to concentrate and just stare at a wall for an hour. This book is from the perspective of a mountain lion in the Hollywood Hills and how he perceives humans and behaves around them. How common and simple things to us come across as really nonsensical and silly to a mountain lion. I think it can be really hard to write a good POV from an animal, but this one was done so perfectly. I was genuinely sad when this was over because I just didn't want it to end. Writing was beautiful, but it was also super short and snappy, so it felt like I was racing through it. I read Revenge by Yoko Agawa, who is an author I absolutely love, and this is one of the books that I just hadn't got round to yet, and I'm so glad I finally read it because I loved this. It has definitely taken top spot of Yoko Agawa's work for me. This is a short story collection, and I didn't really look into what it was actually about before reading it because I knew I would probably like it because I love Yoko Agawa. I knew it would be somewhat dark, a little bit weird, and it pleasantly surprised me so much because I loved this even more than any of her other books. I loved it a lot more than I expected to. The thing I didn't know about this collection that made me absolutely adore it is that all of the stories are connected, but in the most genius and unexpected ways. I don't want to explain what I mean because I think that would spoil the most magical part of this book by telling you how they're connected. But when you read one story and then read the next, you realize how the next story was connected to the previous story and how the eighth story was connected to the second story, because it's not super obvious. It's done in really subtle but incredibly clever ways. Each of the stories is a little bit dark, a little bit weird, a little bit twisted. And I've read her other short story collection, The Diving Pool, but Revenge is so much better. I finished it, I gave it 4 stars, but I feel like I do need to go back and give it 4.5 because I haven't stopped thinking about it. I read The Devil's Grip by Lena Wolf, which is one of her more recent publications and translations, and this started off quite boring and cliche for me. By the end, it took an absolutely wild turn. It went from 0 to 100 and I ended up loving it. It's about a woman who is infatuated with and in love with an absolutely despicably horrible man. To like dirt, she becomes paranoid, she becomes jealous because of his horrendous behaviour. And it is an abusive relationship, but she does not put that label on it. Eventually, they decide to go to therapy separately, but both go. And the therapist speaks to the man first and then speaks to her second. And she outright tells her she is in an abusive relationship and she needs to get out immediately. But our main character does not see this. She sees the therapist as being extremely negative and harmful, and she does not want to believe a word she is saying. Eventually, our main character does come to terms with the behaviour of this man that she is in love with, and she starts to believe there's actually a demon living within him. As a way to escape, she ends up following another man all the way to New Orleans, and here her life just crumbles into a million pieces. At the beginning of this book, I was really worried it was just going to be a cliche toxic relationship type book. Both of the characters' actions was just annoying me and winding me up, and then after about the first third, it began to really ramp up and everything started to become a little bit twisted and weird. I ended up really enjoying this. I just adore Lena Wolf's writing style. All of her books are quite different from each other in my opinion, so liking one doesn't mean you'll like the rest, and disliking one doesn't mean you'll dislike the rest. I think from the synopsis on the back, it does sound like a super simple concept for a book, and it doesn't sound like anything unique or different, which is why I was so surprised when I finished reading this of the turn that it took. It becomes very disturbing and bleak at the end, and I loved it. If you watched my 24-hour readathon vlog, you will have seen that I started Dark Matter but only read a few pages, so I ended up finishing it in the first couple of days of May. And this is a new favourite for me. I absolutely loved it and immediately want to read more from Michelle Paver. This is about a man called Jack who decides to join a group of other men on an expedition to the Arctic. They choose an area that is believed to be untouched and uninhabited, one of the most isolating places you could go. After some time, one by one, his companions are forced to leave for a variety of different reasons, and Jack is left alone in the Arctic in this completely isolated place, all on his own to weather the winter. Jack is left completely on his own with only his thoughts to keep him company in the pitch black where there is no sense of daytime and nighttime. There's no overtly obvious horror to this book, but it has this incredible sense of dread that increases every page that you turn. It is so eerie. I felt claustrophobic and scared reading it. It explores how if we were left in complete isolation, would our mind be able to stay sane, or would our mind turn on itself? It's the type of book that if you read of an evening, you'll be scared to turn the lights off before you go to sleep. Very visual book. I almost felt like I was there with Jack. I almost felt like I could actually feel the cold that he was experiencing. The story is told through Jack's journal entries, so this also adds another layer to the book where how reliable are his journal entries? Is everything he's saying the truth? Is he losing his mind? We're going into summer, so it's maybe not the perfect time to read this book, but in the UK, I'm sure we will have some horribly dark and bleak rainy days over the summer at some point. So definitely read this and save it for a dark, rainy day. Bad Fruit by Ella King is a hardback I've had on my shelves for almost 3 years now, and I finally got round to reading it this month. And this was 3 stars for me. It was okay. A lot of people I know and follow on social media have given this rave reviews. And I liked it, but it really didn't grab me in the way it seems to have for other people. This is about our main character who has a very tumultuous relationship with her mother. She does everything she can, tries to do it perfectly for her mother. She has to step on eggshells around her just to try and prevent her mother's rage. Our main character keeps getting these little random flashbacks and memories of her childhood or her mother's childhood. She isn't quite sure. As these memories and flashbacks get longer and more detailed, she starts to unravel what truly happened in her family's past. This was an entertaining read. I would maybe call it a literary thriller or just a dark literary fiction, but there were lots of elements of this book that made me cringe a little bit, so I did not enjoy it as much as other people. First of all, the flashbacks that she has, they start as tiny, like 5-word sentences, and throughout the book, these flashbacks get longer and longer. They are so detailed, go into so much depth, and I obviously understand that people have repressed memories when they've been through trauma, but I just found the depth of these memories and flashbacks to just be unrealistic. And I know sometimes with books, you just have to suspend your disbelief, you have to take things with a pinch of salt, but I just couldn't this time. I've been trying to read one long book a month, and my long book for May was out. This is a chunker. How many pages is she? She's like 500 pages. I love this. This is not a traditional thriller in the sense of mystery, because you start off the book already knowing what crime has taken place, and then we follow the characters as they deal with covering it up and keeping secrets and trying not to get caught by authority. This is about 4 women who work in a factory. It's kind of a bento box style factory. And one of the women kills her husband and confides in another woman and tells her what has happened and asks for her help. And eventually, more and more characters become involved in this secret. It's not the type of book that has loads of plot twists, but it was highly entertaining. And for someone who normally only reads quite short books, I flew through these 500 pages. The characters had a lot of depth to them and were so well fleshed out. I became quite attached to them by the end and felt like I truly knew them. The book has a lot of commentary on working class struggles, on how we are perceived, on how we struggle financially, on the type of jobs we can get, how if you're working class, time has to be sacrificed so much. Money has a huge part to play in this book, and before the book starts, on one of the first few pages, it has a little conversion chart of yen to British pounds, which I thought was so helpful, because when money plays such a huge part in the storyline and people are paying people off or people are loaning money and it adds so much to the story, I think it's really important to know how much money we're talking about to understand people's levels of desperation. After finishing this book, I immediately went on to Vinted and bought another book from the author called Real World, which is a lot shorter, but I'm really excited to read that as well. Another prompt from my TBR jar for my May TBR was to read a Penguin Modern Classic, and I chose one initially and gave up on it because I was really struggling to get into it, and instead ended up reading Baron Bagay. This is absolutely tiny, so short, but also so intense. It's about a cavalry officer during the First World War. He receives strict orders from his commander to ride into Russian machine guns. But instead of meeting certain death as he anticipates, he finds himself in this otherworldly, peaceful, enemy-less place. Whilst he's there, he finds himself entangled in a bit of a love affair. This was originally published in 1955 and then was republished by Penguin years later, but I feel like this book has really stood the test of time. It has a lot of really visual and visceral descriptions of weather. Weather has a huge part to play in this book, and I feel like it touches on a little bit how as humans we will sometimes use love as a way to cope with big changes in our life and in our reality. This wasn't a 5-star read for me. It wasn't life-changing, but it was very memorable. It's a book I will definitely continue to recommend if you want something short, snappy and effective. I read Deliver Me by Elle Nash, and I have read 2 books previously from Elle Nash and didn't like them, but this one was a lot longer and had a more interesting concept to me. So finally got around to reading it. And I liked this, but I find it hard to recommend. This is about a woman who works in a meat packing facility, and she has a very mundane life with a very uninterested boyfriend. She has gone through many miscarriages and is pregnant again and is determined to make this work. She is determined to make it to full term. She realizes when she's pregnant, she gets more love and affection and attention from her boyfriend and her mother and just everyone in her life. And she loves this. When a friend who she has not spoke to in 20 years randomly reappears in her life, the main character starts to worry that she will go back into the shadows. This book was really entertaining. The ending was absolutely wild. It was crazy. I would read this purely even just for the ending, because it will just disturb you and blow your mind. But I struggle to recommend this because of the multiple events of animal abuse and animal death and animal torture in this book. I never really ever checked trigger warnings for books because I didn't really think I had anything that triggered me. But going forward, I will definitely be checking for trigger warnings of animal cruelty and animal death in books, because in this one, it completely caught me by surprise and made me feel I actually had to stop reading some of the sections and just skip a page because I couldn't deal with it. So the front cover literally has someone with an insect in their mouth, so you would think that would maybe give it away. There is horrible cruelty towards cats and dogs in this book that I didn't expect, and that's why I find it hard to recommend, because it made me feel so uncomfortable. Like me, and animal cruelty in books is something you just cannot cope with, then maybe don't read this, or try and find out what pages they're on and skip past them. But if that is something that isn't a personal trigger for you and it's something you can kind of just skip past, then maybe give this a go if you want something quite weird and wild and disturbing. I read Portal Mania by Debbie Urbanski, who very kindly offered to send me a copy of this book, which is very recently published, all the way from the US to the UK, so I'm very grateful for that. And I'm glad to report I really ended up enjoying this. This collection, for me, turns a lot of current societal problems and issues that we face, but turns them into sci-fi and dystopian little weird short stories. One story, we are in a world where there is odd and even politics, so on odd days of the month, there is one political party in power and whose rules and policies you have to follow, and then on the odd days of the month, it's a different opposite end of the spectrum political party whose rules and policies you have to follow, and it's about how people struggle to live in this weird interchanging world, and it was such a fascinating idea. Another story, which was probably my favourite one, it was about how women are struggling with this disease that is turning them into very different people. They can no longer speak, they no longer have any libido, and they are completely changing physically as well. Follow a couple where the man is really struggling to come to terms with how much his wife has changed. He gets angry when he speaks to her and she can't reply back, and he gets angry that they can't have the relations that they used to. For me, it felt like a story that was touching on how people with disabilities may face different stigmas and discrimination and struggles in romantic relationships. And it was a very sad and frustrating story to read. As you can probably guess from the title of the book, there are lots of portals involved in lots of the stories in this collection, and it is very futuristic. One element I absolutely loved about this book that actually came after the end of the collection was a section of notes from the author on each of the single stories. Explained why they wrote each story, where the idea came from, what it means to them, what message it's trying to explore. For me, this added so much more depth to each of the stories and made me fall in love with them so much more. I think more authors need to do this with their short story collections, because it was an element that I just adored and have never seen before. I read Immaculate Conception, which is the newest release from Ling Huang, who was the author of Natural Beauty, which is one of my favourite books ever, and I really enjoyed this. Not as much as Natural Beauty, unfortunately, but still a banger, still a book I will be recommending to the weird girlies. This follows two best friends who meet at an art school, and one of them ends up having a super successful career, whereas the other friend is kind of left in the shadows. I think the time in which the book is set is slightly ambiguous, because the art exhibitions these artists are able to put on are super futuristic and crazy and unimaginable. The friend that's the one who's kind of left in the shadows ends up marrying a billionaire whose company is creating technology to be able to invoke empathy and to be able to take away some of the trauma from someone else's mind. The successful artist friend is really struggling mentally, so they decide to go through this new technological procedure where Enka, the other friend, will take some of her memories and take some of the burden off of her, but then the boundaries between them begin to blur and everything kind of spirals. This is a very extreme story of how far people are willing to go and how much people are willing to sacrifice for their art. Are you willing to sacrifice your family? Are you willing to sacrifice your love and your friendships, your reputation? Are you willing to sacrifice your health and your safety? How far will you truly go to be a successful artist? I don't even understand how Ling Huang's mind came up with some of the art concepts in this book, some of the exhibition concepts. They absolutely blew my mind. I really, really enjoyed this book, and it definitely has stuck in my mind. It is obviously a tale of our sacrifices for our art, but it's also a tale of completely obsessive friendship, and also how damaging technology can truly be to our lives, to our art, to everything. I read my third James Baldwin, which was The Fire Next Time. This is a tiny little non-fiction book. And this blew me away. Content of this book is drawn from James Baldwin's own experiences living in Harlem and being a black man in America. James Baldwin writes so profoundly. Every single word is chosen with so much intention. There are so many thoughts and concepts and questions in this book that hadn't even crossed my mind previously and made me think so much. This is such an important read, and I can't believe I hadn't read it sooner. It touches on James Baldwin's own relationship with religion and his experience of joining a church, and then slowly come to the realization that a large element of the church is running a business. It touches on how he came across groups of people who saw white people as demons, and he didn't feel like he fit into this group because he had white people in his life that he loved, but he simultaneously understands why the people in these groups felt that way and why they had these beliefs because of the complete injustice and horrors they have been put through. I honestly think this book should be mandatory, compulsory reading in schools. Tenderline is about Plim, who goes to school to become an apprentice butcher. And over the years, his career booms. He becomes super successful. As he's kind of climbing the career ladder, his obsession with and yearning for meat increases every day. Meat is all he can think about, and he wants to close the gap between man and beast. I feel like in the past few years we've had a lot of books set in slaughterhouses or meat packing facilities or very similar settings, and you would expect this book to be disturbing and weird, but it's actually more literary, and I enjoyed this a lot more than I expected to because it went in a completely different direction than I expected it to. This doesn't have a huge amount of plot to it. It's much more of a character study of Plim and his life as a butcher, but it also looks into how, even as meat eaters, the odd occasion where we kind of tie together the idea of this live, living, breathing animal and the meat that's on our plate, it does disturb us, and the confusion of how disturbed we are by that idea, but how we still yearn to continue to be meat eaters. Suspicion is a tiny, super short little Japanese mystery. There was a journalist who is looking into a recent case where a woman and man were in a car together and suddenly the car drives down a ditch at full force. The woman survives, but the man dies, and everyone believes that she did it deliberately. Everyone believes that she murdered him. She completely pleads her innocence, and the case is going to trial. The journalist is determined to condemn this woman in the press, but he has some questions that he can't quite get out of his mind, and he unravels some quite surprising things. I loved this tiny little book. I read it so fast. It was so entertaining. I was absolutely enthralled by it. Such few pages. The characters had so much depth to them. I was literally on the edge of my seat. It was a complete page turner. It's not a 5-star life-changing new favourite, but I highly recommend to get you out of a reading slump, and it's definitely an author I need to read more from. The whole is set in a prison in the 1960s and follows 3 inmates who are trying to put a plan together to sneak drugs into the prison. And the plan they've got is to use one of the mothers of the inmates to sneak the drugs in during visiting hours, but everything about their plan just goes completely wrong. I loved the idea behind this book. When I read the synopsis, I was like, yes, I'm definitely reading this. I'm going to love it. But this was a 2-star read for me. There was just something that didn't work for me. I did not like the writing style. I feel like the synopsis sounded a lot more exciting than the actual execution of the story. The story is told in basically one long continuous block of text. There's no page breaks or chapters. And I can't lie, that did make this very hard to follow. I can't quite point my finger on it, but for me, this book just was not that captivating or exciting, and it just did not work. Sylvia was a really surprising and pleasant read for me. I've had this on my shelf for a few years now, and I've just never had the urge to pick it up, and I'm so glad I finally did. This follows a man who has taken up residence near one of the rare mystical baobab trees in South India. One day, a new woman walks into his life named Sylvia, and they bond over their new relationship. But one day she disappears. The rest of the book is then told through different tales from different characters of people who were in Sylvia's life. See her in the lives of colleagues and friends and distant relatives, and eventually by the end of the book, Sylvia comes back into focus. I did really like this book, but the beginning was the best part for me, where we follow this man living by this tree and his close relationship with his neighbour, and how Sylvia enters into his life. I feel a little bit more lost when all these new tales and characters became involved. I really do wish it had stayed as a normal novel rather than a little bit of a novel and then little stories added in. Definitely be reading more from this author. That is all of the books I read in May. I was going to try and go through what my June TBR looks like with you, but I already feel like I've been talking for 1,000 years. So I'm just going to leave that, and we'll discuss those books when we get to June's reading wrap up. But please let me know in the comments if you've read any of the books I've mentioned mentioned, what you thought of them, if your opinion differs from mine, what your favourite book of May was, what your least favourite book of May was. Always, thanks so much for watching and engaging with my channel. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers already, which is crazy, and I'm so thankful because I am really enjoying doing more of this long form content. It definitely takes more time than TikTok and Instagram does, and I definitely am struggling to get to grips with filming these videos into my life. But nevertheless, I am glad to be here. Thank you, and I'll see you soon.